Hi, this is Steve Michelotti. I give a lot of presentations. Sometimes these presentations are standing on stage at a developer conference, at least before COVID-19, but a lot of times these presentations are just me sharing my screen with one or more colleagues. But without fail, in either case, I always seem to get asked, what is that tool you're using to Zoom? And I happily tell people that I'm using ZoomIt. However, the next thing I typically observe is that people enthusiastically go install it, but without a great sense of how to use it effectively. Regardless of the size of your audience, it's really important that you're able to draw your viewers' attention to exactly where you want them to be looking on your screen. So in this video, I'm going to share 15 tips that I've learned over the course of many years of using this tool. The first thing you want to do is go to your favorite search engine and just type the word ZoomIt, all one word. And invariably, the first result you're going to get is the ZoomIt page that you want to go to. So let's come in here and click in that link. And the first thing you're going to see right here is this little icon right here that'll show you where you go to download ZoomIt. So literally just click this and it's going to download it to your system. Now the key is you should download it to a central location. Notice I've put it here in Dropbox. I have a little folder here called Dropbox Utils. So you should download it to a central location, Dropbox, OneDrive, whatever the case may be for what you use, so that it's available on every machine you use. And you'll see that it's really just a single exe sitting right here. So tip number one is install in a central location like Dropbox or OneDrive so it's available on all your machines. You're going to see that ZoomIt is just an exe. Nothing else to it. So you can just double click this to run it. Now I'm not going to double click it right now because I already have it running, which if I come down to my system tray, we can see right down here, it's already running. And if I click on this with my right mouse click button and click options, the next thing I want to point your attention to is this checkbox at the very bottom left right here where it says run ZoomIt when Windows starts. Make sure you have this checkbox checked. In my opinion, this is the most important thing here because I don't want to have to search around for where did I install ZoomIt inside of Dropbox. I want ZoomIt to always be running so it's ready at a moment's notice for me to start using it. So tip number two is run ZoomIt automatically when Windows starts. The next tip is that it's good to know the basics really well. So in order to zoom, I do Control-1. Then you can sort of reposition with your mouse gradually, make some micro adjustments. And when you have it to where you want it, do a regular left mouse click with your mouse. Notice how my cursor then turns into this red cross. And then I can start doing stuff like drawing different shapes. And we'll talk about how to do that in a minute. And then escape to escape. Again, so the basics are Control-1 to zoom, maybe some adjustments, left click, escape to escape. Last time, Control-1, escape. So know those basics really well. That should be like muscle memory. Get to know that gesture really well. So tip number three is know the basics. Control-1 to zoom, escape to escape. Now I'm going to be flipping over to the Azure portal for the remainder of these, not because Azure is in any way relevant to zooming, but the portal is going to give me some nice visual things I can zoom in on. But in fact, you can see I've actually removed almost everything from this dashboard and we've got a bunch of blank space over here. So I'm mostly going to be zooming in this area over here. Now the next tip I'm going to give you is, in my opinion, the most important tip of any of the 15 tips I'm showing. This one's most important. Let's say I want to zoom in on this little American flag here. The biggest mistake I see people making is doing zooming like this. See how the screen just jumped? Let me show it again. The screen is jumping, and that is not pleasing to your audience. Your users are going to be getting motion sickness. The key to know is the zoom is going to go to wherever your mouse pointer is pointing. So if you're not cognizant of where your mouse is, see my mouse is down here. If I start the zoom down here, then I have to quickly adjust to get the American flag back here. That's not what you want. So what you want to do is first put your cursor right on top of that American flag, then stop touching your mouse, and then just do your Control-1. See how smooth that zoom process is? I can escape to escape. Again, Control-1, nice smooth zoom process. Then I can click and start drawing stuff if I want to draw it. Let's say I want to zoom in on my name up here. Again, position my cursor to this far right corner over here, and then it elegantly zooms up here, and I can start looking at those type of things. So, most important, pre-position your mouse pointer before zooming. Let me show that in one other example. Let's say I'm coming up here to this search box, and I type a search term such as Cosmos. Well, let's say I want to actually demonstrate this whole box here. But if my cursor's up here where I just type that final S, if I zoom in here, the problem is, well, my box is kind of getting cut off a little bit here, and that's not exactly what I want. So if I come in here and position my mouse cursor right in the center of this black box, okay, that's a little better. I've now got the edges that are visible on the left and right side, so that's good. But remember, I was trying to demonstrate the search box, and that's way up here somewhere, and it's been lost. So really what you want to do is position your mouse cursor about at the top, kind of right below the text box or right at the top of this black box. And if I zoom in here, now this is looking pretty good because the entire text box here is visible. And I've also got the edges of this black box. So I can come in and demonstrate different things about the box. There's my services, there's my documentation, and that sort of thing. So be very cognizant about where you're pre-positioning your mouse first before zooming. So tip number 4 is pre-position the mouse before zooming, and that is the most important tip in my opinion. Now let's start talking about some of those drawing and highlighting I'm doing. You may notice I've done this box gesture many times. I think this is the most effective highlighting tool you have in ZoomIt. And the way to do this is just hold the control key down and then go from left to right and top to bottom. And this gives you the easiest way to draw those boxes. And I always think to myself left to right and top to bottom. Sometimes people kind of go this direction and you can sort of go different directions, but it's easy to get confused. Don't ever confuse yourself with that. Always think left to right, top to bottom with the control key. So tip number 5 is favor box highlighting above all others, and you can just use the control key with that. The next tip is a follow-on to the last one, which is sometimes people get in here into the drawing mode and they see they can draw rectangles, but then they also see that they can do free drawing like this. And they think, oh, this is super cool. I can come in here and draw rectangles and I can circle different things on the diagram here and I can do all this cool stuff. And I feel like John Madden illustrating a football game and maybe I can draw some arrows and it ends up looking like this. So my next tip is don't do this. In fact, avoid free drawing altogether. It may seem cool at first, but resist that temptation. It always ends up looking messy and disorganized and actually doesn't help your audience much because they think it's becoming this disorganized mess. So my suggestion is avoid this. In fact, tip number 6 is avoid free draw highlighting completely. Resist the temptation. Now the next tip has to do with arrow highlighting. So instead of the box where you hold down the control key, with the arrow you can hold down control and shift at the same time, and that is what enables you to do arrows. Now I think this is also effective, so even though I prefer box highlighting, I think arrow highlighting is effective as well. But there's a big gotcha to this. Let's say I want to draw an arrow from this label that says Azure to this label that says Service Health, and I just want to kind of do an arrow from left to right, pointing to Service Health. What often happens is people will do this and they say, oh, wait, this isn't right. Like my arrow is pointing the wrong way. I wanted this to point at Service Health. So you have to be aware that it's a little counterintuitive. It's actually from front to back, from beginning to end. It's like you start at where you want the thing to point, so to speak. So you actually have to draw in this direction. And that is a gotcha you have to know about. Similarly, let's say you want to draw something from right to left, from Azure over to favorite, same deal. If you come in here and you think, oh, I do like this, and then your arrow is pointing the wrong way. So you actually have to start at the end and point this direction. And that's true regardless of whether you're going top, bottom, left, right, up, down. You always start at the end. So be aware of that. Practice it in advance before you start confusing your audience with the arrow pointing the wrong way. Arrow highlighting can be effective, but know those gotchas. So tip number 7 is arrow highlighting, which is control and shift key at the same time. That is effective, but know that it's front to back. Okay, now the next tip has to do with when I have different spots on the screen I want to zoom to. So let's say we see this all resources button right up here, and notice we have this subscriptions button down here with the yellow key symbol. So let's say I want to point out both of those buttons. What I see a lot of times is people will come up here, start talking about this button, then they'll zoom out because the subscriptions, notice when I was in here, I can't see the subscriptions button anywhere. It's down here somewhere, it's out of frame. So I'll zoom out, come down, and now I can zoom in and start talking about subscriptions. And so what happens is you're zooming in, you're zooming out, you come down here, you zoom in, you zoom out, and you're eventually causing motion sickness for your viewers again. So what you can do as an alternative is this. You can do your regular zoom in here, point out what you want them to point out. Now, if you know this other thing you want to point out is just at the bottom of the frame, what you can do is while you're zoomed in, right-click the mouse, that gets control back to being able to reposition the screen. I can gradually scroll down on the screen here. Oh, there it is. Now I can left click. That freezes the screen back up, puts me back in drawing mode, and I can come in here. So that also helps your viewers not get motion sickness as well. You can reposition the screen carefully while you're actually in a zoomed in mode. So tip number 8 is reposition while zoomed. Right click, reposition, left click. Now sticking with that same example where I have a button up here I want to highlight and a button down here I want to highlight, sometimes you want your viewer to still see the whole screen and you don't necessarily want to zoom because you don't want anything to fall out of frame, but you still want to be able to do the boxes and highlighting. In that situation, what you can do is Control 2. Notice it didn't zoom, but it did change my cursor into the red cross, and so now I can start doing my drawing tools like this. And so I can still point out those buttons that are separated across from each other, kind of far apart from each other, but I didn't have to zoom at all. So that can also be an effective tool in your toolbox. Escape to escape out of that mode. So tip number 9 is leverage draw tools without zooming. And you do that by using Control 2. The next one has to do with the default zoom level. So by default, you have a 2x zoom level. And my suggestion is leave the default zoom level of 2x. Let me show you what I mean. Sometimes what happens is people come down here and I go into my options and they say, well, if 2x is good, then 3x and 4x must be even better. So they flip it to 4x and they start zooming. And if you look at this, like the text here in full screen actually looks grainy. In fact, this arrow I just put, even the arrow is a little grainy and it just doesn't look good. It's too much in my opinion. So I think in terms of visual appeal, you should leave it at the default zoom level of 2.0. Now, one quick caveat to that is, let's say, yes, I've convinced you to leave the default zoom level of 2.0, but there might be situations where you do want extra zoom. You can do a one-off zoom to 3, 4x, whatever the case may be, simply by using your mouse scroll wheel. So here, I'm using a mouse scroll wheel to do that extreme zoom in and out. So if I need it for a one-off, I can, but in general, I leave the default. So tip number 10, leave default zoom level of 2x, scroll wheel if you need it. The next tip, I've never really found a use for it in a formal presentation, but I definitely use it when I'm interacting with colleagues, maybe whiteboarding stuff. So let's say I come in here and I zoom, I'm in drawing mode. If I type T on my keyboard, T for typing, notice I get this beam right here and I can position it, let's say I want to position it right under the flag, then I can just start typing stuff. I can right click to get out of it, get my cursor back. I can do T again, and let's say I want to position it now down here. I can left click, and I can start typing again. This is a map. And I can even backspace it if I make a typo. Again, right click to get out of it, and of course I still have all the drawing tools and stuff like that. So again, I don't think typing is necessarily good when you're doing a formal presentation, but I have found it to be effective sometimes when I'm having meetings with colleagues. So tip number 11, typing, which you do with the T button, can sometimes be effective, but use it sparingly. The next tip is another example of making sure you don't end up with a messy screen. Let's say I want to come here and highlight some stuff, and then I want to come here and highlight more things and inside the box, and what happens is it can get a little messy and there's a lot of diagrams. So you should know how to erase, and there's 2 ways to erase. Number 1, Control Z. You can see it does it one at a time, Control Z, just like a typical undo. Or the other way you can erase is just do E for erase, and that erases everything all at once. And I think it's important to know that for a couple of reasons. Number 1, if I come in here and I highlight this whole favorites bar, and then I start, drawing boxes inside, it can get a little busy. So instead, what I think is more effective to do is talk about, hey, here's the favorites bar. Then you can erase it and then say, here are the 2 buttons I want to point your attention to inside the favorites bar. And so it can prevent the screen from just getting a little too busy and messy. So know how to erase so you can reset the user's context on exactly what you want them to focus on. So tip number 12, know how to erase. There's 2 ways to do it, Control Z one at a time like an undo, or E for erasing everything. The next tip has to do with the default pointer size. This is another mistake I see, in my opinion, I see people doing, and I think you should leave the default pointer size. So this default pointer size is about this width, and I think that's good. But sometimes what happens is people discover that if they can do the Control up arrow or Control down arrow, they can make it bigger and smaller. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to do Control up arrow a few times. Notice my little pointer has become really thick now. And I can start drawing these arrows and boxes. And at first you're like, ooh, this is cool. This points out even more of the things I want my user to be paying attention to. But I've found that this just gets a little big and clunky and actually ends up being a little distracting. So I recommend keeping it at the default level. So it's control up arrow, control down arrow. So now I'm back to the default. And I think this default size is the most effective. So tip 13, use the default pointer size, but know how to adjust if you need to, which is control up and control down. Now the next thing I want to point your attention to is colors. By default, you see everything I've done here is in red, but I can now do the G on my keyboard for green, and notice I can get green colors on my highlights. Or I can do Y for yellow, and I can get yellow. Or I can do B for blue, and you can see I get blue. And those are the 4 colors you have available. Now, having said that, my recommendation is to avoid yellow and blue. And the reason I say that is because I feel like, especially on the dark background, I feel like blue can get lost really easily and it's difficult to see. Similarly, let's say I have a light theme. Let's just flip over to a light theme really quick and zoom in. I feel like yellow on a light theme is difficult to see, and that can also get lost and it's hard to see. So I don't think yellow is good either. My opinion is red is the best, but I also find that green can be effective in both cases. So if I'm zoomed in and I'm using green, I think green is perfectly fine, although I do prefer red because I believe that red draws the attention the best. Some people think maybe red is a little bit too in your face, but I think red is the best. So I use red and green in that order. Red is my number 1, green's my number 2, and I avoid all other colors. So tip number 14 is favor red and green pen colors. The next tip I want to show has to do with live zooming. Let's say I come into this text box up here, and instead of control 1 to zoom, I'm going to do control 4 to zoom. And notice when I do that, it doesn't freeze the screen. I can actually do live typing right here. So the one thing is it doesn't freeze the screen. So I can sometimes, it can be a little clunky. I'm kind of moving the screen around and like, I can't quite position it the way I want it. And then sometimes when you get in this mode, you're not sure where the drawing tools are. Actually, if you do control 2 from this mode, then you can get the drawing tools, although it does freeze the screen at that point. I can escape to get out of it. Now I'm back out of drawing mode, but I'm still in live zoom. And I just find this to be a little clunky. So it's there if you need it, but I don't typically use it. And it's also sometimes confusing. How do I get out of it? The escape key is not working. Best way I found is do control 4, and control 4 will get you out of it. Now I'm back in normal mode. So be aware of it. Control 4 to get in and out. If you're in there, control 2, use the tools. But I find it to be a little clunky, so I don't typically use it. So tip 15 is live zoom, which is control 4. It's there if you need it, but I don't. So there you have it. There are your 15 pro tips to zoom it like a Jedi. Hopefully, you've picked up something here that can enhance your presentations by enabling you to draw your audience attention to exactly what you want them to focus on. And then you'll get the fun of people asking you, what is that tool you're using to zoom?